We're now live, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, members and ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. And members, by now you are aware that the need to keep your video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep your microphone muted, except when I invite you to speak. If you need to ask a question, please raise the raised hand function. Otherwise, if that doesn't attract me, the old wave will probably help as well. There's always a risk that we may run into technical problems, and I would ask for your patience if we do so. Should this occur, I would declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed, and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such a time as it can be reconvened. Can I remind members and officers that all virtual meetings will be recorded and that these recordings will be published on the Council's website. If now I'd like to do an attendance check. Would you like to acknowledge your presence as and when I call out your name? Councillor Ian Gardner.
Present.
Councillor Anne Hay.
Present.
Councillor Mike Shellings.
Present.
Councillor David Seaton. I gather we have an apology of non-attendance to David. Is that correct, Dawn?
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Richard Robertson.
Present.
Mr. John Walker.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Matthew Pink. And Mr. Lee Fanco.
Present.
Thank you, Lee. And obviously myself, Councillor Terry Rogers. Apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Already received one apology. Are there any declarations of interest, please?
Yes, Chairman. John Walker, retired member of the scheme.
Thank you, John. Any others, please?
Yeah, Richard Robertson, my usual declaration with regard to my wife's pension.
Thank you.
Terry,
yes, Matthew.
Am I supposed to be here?
Sorry, yes, Chair. I'm an active member and so is my wife.
Thank you, Matthew. Sorry, Peter, has your name been listed off the list? I'm happy for you to attend, Peter, if your name's been missed off my list.
I don't want to impose on you if I'm not required, but I got a message a few minutes ago saying I should come in. I can't remember.
Dawn, help me.
Yeah, Chairman, sorry. I left Councillor Downs off the list, but he definitely should be here. So
sorry, my apologies, Peter.
Oh, well, I'm here.
You're here and more than welcome to stay, and I'd like you to stay, obviously.
Right.
My sincere apologies for that happening. I should have picked that up sooner right before. Okay, let's go to agenda item number 1. We've just completed agenda item number 2. Minutes of the Pension Fund Committee meeting held on the 8th of October 2020. I'll just advise you then the page numbering on the documentation is incorrect, and that I will give you the correct pages of each agenda item as and when it arises. Basically, though, if you just add 2 to the published numbers, you should be on the correct path, so to speak. That said, I'll go through the minutes page by page. Page 3, page 4, page 5, 6, 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, and page 13. Anybody wish to add any comments or corrections to the minutes, please? If that's said, then I'll sign those minutes off as and when I get back into office. Are you happy with that, Dawn?
yes, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Agenda item number 3 can be found on page 17, the action log. Mark, who's going to take us through the action log?
I think both have been completed, so unless there's any questions.
Okay. Everybody content? I can't see any raised hands. Saying action log, then agenda item 3 is completed. Turning now to agenda item 4, which is the administration report for the Pension Fund Committee, can be found on page 19. And Michelle, or is it Joe?
Michelle's not at this meeting today.
I didn't think she was. I couldn't see her.
Yeah, I'll be taking her papers.
Thank you then.
Yeah, okay, thank you. This is the regular report that we present to you on the administration performance in respect to the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund. Going through it in order, there is a private appendix, I should say, which we, if anyone wants to talk about in detail, we'll have to go into private session for that. The first item is the key performance indicators. And as you'll see from Appendix 1, I'm not sure what page number you've got because mine are different to yours. As you'll be aware from since the course of the pandemic, our key performance indicators have been, we've met them going forward. Unfortunately, in the last couple of months, in September and October,
That's on page 24 for your info, Joe.
Thank you. In the last couple of months, we did have a dip in performance in a couple of areas due to 2 reasons. The first reason was in September, where we had several days of system outage due to the network at NCC and also with the Altair pensions administration system that was down. That did affect our ability to meet the KPIs in the areas where there was a 5-day working turnaround. That was largely in the payment of retirement benefits from active and from deferred status too. We've got several ambers as well, but that's all reflected within the system outage that we had during that time. And there was an occasion where we had a member of staff, a team leader covering another team lead who was absent, and the prioritisation of some of the work wasn't as it should have been in the normal course of things. So that also has affected performance in a couple of areas. But this has been the first sort of dip in performance during the whole of the lockdown, so we should hold on to that thought, and we are confident that things would have picked up over the last month and a half since these issues arose. Turning back to the report, section 3 is the receipt of employee and employer contributions. That's on page, I think for you, 26. And as you'll see for the quarter, we're exceeding 99% return of employers paying on time, which is good. And as you'll see from the private appendix, there's just 2 employers on there. Obviously, I won't name them. Small amounts of members and only a few days late, and that they've not paid late during the course of the year before that. So we're not too worried about that, but we have reminded them of the need to pay on time as per the regulations. Turning back to the report again, section 4 is breaches of the law. Again, here we have 3 refund of pension contribution payments which were claimed by and paid to the members outside of the statutory 5-year period. This is the ongoing one we were going to have for quite a while until the regulations have been amended to remove the 5-year requirement within which these should be paid. We still don't know when that's going to happen, but we'll carry on reporting this. The breach as non-material until the regulations change on that one. Section 5 is the internal dispute resolution procedure cases that we have ongoing at the moment. Just 2 to report there. The decisions have been due in the last couple of days. I unfortunately haven't prepared what those responses were, but I can let you know outside of the meeting if that's required. Then item 6 on this report is just to let you know, bring up to speed with what is known as the end of LGSS, which took place on the 30th of November. We're now no longer entitling ourselves as LGSS. We're just pension services. The operating model for LGSS finished on the 30th of November, sorry. And we're going to continue to provide shared services, shared service administration to both Cambridgeshire and Northamptonshire pension funds. with Northamptonshire being the lead authority with effect from 1st of December. And we were managed within the Finance Director of NCC up until 1st of April 2021, when Northamptonshire becomes a unitary authority, and where we believe we'll be sitting under, well, we definitely will be sitting under West Northamptonshire Council going forward from that. That's the end of the report, so happy to take any further questions.
Any questions, please? Mike.
Thank you, Terry. Just to go back to Appendix 1, where we had some failures to meet normal targets, which is most unusual. Have we caught up?
Yes, as I understand it, yes. Yeah, I mean, it was the biggest driver was three days of outage, literally consecutively, followed by, and then that meant that the 5-day turnaround time was just unfeasible for a whole host of cases. So it was caught up very, very quickly.
Good. Thank you.
Ian. See you, John, but Ian Gardner's first.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it was just under regard to 5.2. I was just wondering if we could, the Pensions Committee could be told about the decision on Tier 1 health estimates, which was due on the 5th of December. I know you said you hadn't got that information with you, Joe, but it'd be beneficial, I think, if the committee could have a brief email after this Pensions Committee meeting on that outcome.
Yep, we'll do that.
Thank you. That could make, obviously, distribution to all members, please, Joe.
Of course, yeah.
John, yes, please. You're on mute at the moment. You're not now.
Thank you, Chairman. This may have been dealt with just the last few minutes, but I've received several indications from members who are currently working but have requested details of what they would get, estimates of what they would get if they retired. Several have said they've been waiting some time without acknowledgement. I assume that what Joe said already about the fact that there was a backlog, I assume they've now been dealt with, because obviously this is causing concern to some members. Thank you.
Joe, do you want me to come in there?
Yes, thank
Yeah. Yeah, right. So we have had quite a few chasers. It's not that we haven't acknowledged, because we automatically acknowledge, and we keep members up to date as to what's happening. But the problem has been us not getting the information in order to process the estimate from the scheme employer or the payroll provider. So and this is around, primarily has been around the Cambridgeshire County Council payroll provider. So we've obviously been dealing with that as a particular issue, but that's the only feedback I've had from scheme members. But it is certainly is a real issue to be dealt with.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, John. If you'd like to pass that message back to those people that have contacted you, it would be appreciated.
This afternoon, Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
If I may, Chairman, if I could just say, we have put a emergency contact point on our website if people are really struggling now. So that was something we put on, well, it's quite a little while ago, a number of weeks back now, but people can come through to that and we will respond as soon as we possibly can.
Thank you very much, Mark. Richard?
Chairman, if I may, John said that people hadn't received acknowledgement. Mark said we automatically acknowledge. Can that be resolved? Because there may be a system problem there.
Chairman, if I can come back in there, obviously difficult to actually verify that. I think only 2 of the people who've contacted me have said they've not received acknowledgements, but I don't quite know what form the acknowledgements took. If they were electronic, maybe they just didn't check their system. I'm happy to accept what Mark says about the fact that acknowledgements have been sent, and I shall inform people involved of that.
Thank you. Would you just confirm that, Mark? Just do a quick check on it anyway.
Yeah,
Check.
and what I can do actually is I can provide John offline with a contact point. So if he does get any inquiries, then it can go directly into one of my senior managers.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Chairman, if I may come in there as well, just to reassure you that we have tested these facilities recently because we've been removing the reference to LGSS from our auto responses. So I can confirm from our point of view, the auto responses are being sent out. What we obviously can't predict is whether they'll be caught up in junk mail boxes or other things stopping it from actually being received by the member. But I can assure you that they are being sent out and are working as far as we're aware.
Thank you, Corey, for that reassurance. Richard, I think you're ready.
Actually, I was just going to raise issues about the KPIs which have been dealt with, I think. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Any other issues then on this particular agenda item 4? If that's the case, are you happy for me to take on the recommendation to note the report? Nobody's complaining. That's very good indeed. Okay, let's turn now to agenda item number 5, which is the annual business plan report. Can be found on pages 27 to 44. And Mark, I think you're leading on this one.
Thank you, yes, Chairman. So if I just go through, the things which have gone very, very positively. So in terms of the 7 investment activities in the report, they've all moved forward extremely well. The one which was slightly lagging was the asset pooling one, where, if you remember, there was a suspension of sub-fund progress. That's now kicked off again, and we've had a number of launches which Paul will obviously provide the details of in the exempt session later. Related to that, but not strictly speaking investment strategy, the multiple investment strategies we will be discussing today. So we'll obviously bring you up to date with that one. Turning to page 28, which is the first activity, business continuity plan. We have reprofiled this to reflect the fact that we did, if you recall, do a very quick but complete review in advance of the pandemic. But principally what's then happened, obviously with Northamptonshire County Council morphing into, the pension service moving to West Northamptonshire, we're going to have a new corporate entity that we're linked into. And so we do feel it's probably appropriate to actually test that once it's in place in April. But what we're looking at the moment is the resilience around Aquila Hayward, where our software platform is on. So in effect, we're doing what we can in advance of the 1st of April, but we do believe there's some activity to be undertaken afterwards, and that's been reprofiled accordingly. The next activity is cybercrime. And again, we've updated this considerably in this latest iteration. The entire team has had some training now on cybercrime activity. It's actually a mandatory training at the council. But senior officers have been doing quite a lot of work with some online sessions. Certainly myself, with Aon, with the Pensions Management Institute. And what we'll be doing is undertaking a scorecard assessment later this month with senior officers, and then that will feed into effectively the development of a formal plan with some assistance from a specialist in this area. I should point out Aon, who are obviously our governance benefits provider, are quite at the forefront of this. I'll just pause there to see if there's any comments around those 2 activities.
Mike, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, Chairman, thank you. I am extremely concerned about cybersecurity or security from cyber attacks, and wonder what we have in place.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously there is the resilience in the systems in both, and that's both the Altair platform itself, with its sort of multi-factor authentication to get in. Obviously, you've got the corporate network as well. Obviously, but the way people very often bypass that is obviously through human action, and that's why the need to have training with the individuals who are accessing the system was at the forefront. But to be clear, we are going to be having to do quite a bit of work. The scorecard, which is an Aon branded product, has only just been released in the last week or two. I got a formal link to it just about 2 weeks ago. So we're going to use that as almost to see where we are. But as I think Corey and Joe are they've been attending similar sessions as myself around this area. It's identifying things like, okay, where are our weaknesses in terms of data flows? You know, where is the information moving to? How would you categorize it in terms of, you know, whether it's red, amber, green? So we're going to be working with a supplier to do this. We're not going to claim to be complete experts in this. So we'll get some assistance in to help get a proper plan. But as I say, in terms of resilience and in terms of doing what we can with individuals, we've already done that.
Thank you. I mean, I view pension information with all the details that we have on it as a wonderful prize for anybody that could break in. There would be a lot of sensitive information, addresses, names, ages, and so on. So yeah. It is an area of great concern. But I think of particular concern to me is the security of people with whom we share data, and what can we do to make sure that they have the same level or even higher levels of security that we have. I think about the National Fraud Initiative. I think about information we send to people who are trying to identify whether people living abroad are still alive. We have a range of suppliers, and I don't know what we have in place to secure them.
Yes, I mean, obviously we test that to a certain extent, but to be frank, one of the outcomes of this almost certainly will be effectively a questionnaire that will be sent to them, and those questions will be, you know, will be helped to be developed by this specialist. So I think every fund is probably in a very similar position at the moment, and this is something every fund is ramping up. So we've in the past, we've obviously tested that as to the best we could, but we do want to go a step further than we have before in terms of the direct questions we're asking.
Yeah, I mean, I
think you're right to identify that.
Yeah, I hear you say as best we could. The question is that good enough? And I think I would be reassured if I had some external assessment as to how secure we are, because what we don't want is people afraid to give confidential information to the pension fund, which the pension fund needs in order to run itself.
No, I agree. I mean, we're obviously the suppliers we utilize are a small number of names, all incredibly big names in the pensions industry, like Hyman's, like Aon. It's not, we don't send data to, you know.
Well, as Hyams is here in discussing, I must put them down as a suspect organisation.
But yeah, so I understand exactly where you're coming from, Councillor Sherlins, and that is certainly an aspect that we've already identified. That testing, but I think yeah, just to reassure you, we don't have a huge number of external parties that we share data with at all. It's a very, very small number of parties.
And if I could jump in, I just quickly checked there. As part of the last tender for actuarial services, there was a section on data and information security. So we were able to satisfy the fund as regards ISO requirements and GDPR and various other things all in that area as well. So that is tested as part of the tender.
Yeah, as part of the framework itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
More so than the local call off. I think that's useful for you to say that. But I guess we need to do our own testing of this now as well.
I rest, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I think now that this has been highlighted, so to speak, Mark, I think might give a little bit more priority, obviously, to satisfy the members, make sure that we're well and truly secure, or as secure as we possibly can be.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Chairman,
indeed.
before we go on, could we ask Councillor Downs if he could modify his video,
Yes.
because all I can see is his eyebrows.
Well, he might be asleep. I don't know. He's there.
you,
You are, Peter. You're muted.
Well, I'm not now. I'm absolutely agog to hear what Councillor John's got to say. He sees enough on my face anyway. So
You've disappeared again, Peter.
all right, I'm here. No, I've been having my lunch actually.
I don't blame you. Okay, please continue, Mark, if you would. I think you're on SD5 now or something.
Well, I was just going to pick out two more before I turn to the financial. So I'll go through those two and then I'll see if there's any comments around those.
Right.
So firstly, 3.4.2, which is on page 34. This is effectively us seeing if members want to claim refunds. So you may recall we're contacting trying to contact just under 7,000 members who are sitting on our system with an entitlement to a lever but not having claimed it. So far we've gone through 17% of those, and about a third of those we've contacted have actually claimed and now received a refund. So I think that's probably starting to give you an idea of the volume that this exercise may clear, if you like, off of our system. We are being very careful at the speed at which we do this, because obviously the more we send out, the more that will come back and then we immediately have to deal with. And this is a lower priority area of work than some others. The final activity is the one just before that I wanted to just touch on, which is the resolution of undecided leavers. And I think of all of the activities, this is the one which we haven't been able to progress as well as I would have liked. In fact, the volumes have been pretty static through the pandemic, but at least have not gone up to any noticeable extent. I think rather than just throwing more and more resource at this, what we have identified and which we're looking to deal with is just a sheer number of chasers we're having to send. So I'm going to try and get some further context and volumes around that. But thousands and thousands of these cases will be ones where we've asked for more information from the employer, but they haven't actually provided that. So one of the things we're looking to do is actually get direct access to one of the systems which will be able to, for us, for really simple queries, we'll be able to go in and get the information ourselves. So I'm trying to introduce some efficiency in this area as opposed to just throw resource at it. But I think for the next financial year, there's no doubt we need to really look at this and actually put a proper, a more robust plan together for it. I will pause there to see if there's any questions around those two activities.
I have Richard already waiting in the wings. Richard?
Yes, it's interesting. Could you give us some idea of the sort of age profile of the refunds that have not been claimed? I don't mean the age of the people, but the time since they could have claimed it.
Oh gosh, it could be a decade plus. This is literally any time from it. So they could have been sitting on the system since the very moment they left many years ago.
Right. Well, the problem is, of course, the longer it goes, the less likelihood that they'll remember. So.
Well, they won't be. The question is whether they still live where the last contact we had. So we have we obviously got a tracing ability as well to find people, but people move around so much. If we've issued 1,153 and got a third of them to claim, that's actually much higher than I expected. Okay. Believe it or not.
The other question is, have we got no leverage on the employers to provide the information as we do for them to pay up on time? Is it just impossible?
We are, I guess, in a sense, you can probably understand that the actual number of employers that make a material difference are quite small in the fund, i.e. it's the big employers. And so we are trying to deal with them, you know, individually. The leverage ultimately is through the admin strategy and charging, but that's obviously a bit of a blunt instrument. So we're trying to understand what's causing the issues and dealing with that. And one of the issues was with one of our major suppliers was under-resourcing due to effectively a freeze on recruitment, which has now been lifted. So I think they've got a couple of extra people in, and so we're hoping to see some progress there. But as I said, for the main data provider, we're trying to get direct system access as well, because that will enable us to deal with really simple queries instantly.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mike, I think you've got your hand raised.
Thank you, Chairman. 313 SD5, retender extend contracts for mortality screening and address tracing services, which I guess we've just been talking about. Is it cost beneficial?
I mean, Joe, do you want to come in on this one, because you've obviously done quite a bit of thinking around.
Yes, I'm not convinced it is a great benefit from the cost we're paying for address tracing. Mortality screening, totally. We get a lot of useful information out of that. The Tell Us Once service isn't compulsory, and it does pick up members other than retired members as well. So we're happy with the mortality screening. The address tracing is a bit more unwieldy in the sense that we don't always get a confident result back. We could get a low confidence result back, which doesn't really enable us to move forward with that until we've made contact with that member in a way that doesn't reveal any confidential data, just in case we haven't reached the right person. So we could argue that we could spend quite a bit of money tracing the addresses of all our status 9 members, but they may have a refund entitlement to £5, and it might cost us £10 to trace their whereabouts, and it might not be the right person. So it has its place, and it's good for when it's successful, but it's not completely. We couldn't give a list of 100 people and be 100% confident that 100 people would be traced accurately. So it works best for priority cases where there's a greater risk of fraud in terms of sort of status 5 and 6 members. Should any of them, sorry, they are our pensioner members. We need to keep an eye on their whereabouts. But yeah, I'm not 100% convinced that it's worth it in all cases. And it's not something we would want to do annually for every single scheme member. It needs to be very targeted. And we need to have a lot of background information on that scheme member, i.e. their last addresses, otherwise it becomes even less effective.
Could you put a figure, Joe, could you put a figure on what the tracing costs are for me, please?
Probably not in a public session.
Right, okay.
But I can circulate that outside of the meeting, if that's okay.
I can understand, obviously, with mortality, that's quite important as regards fraud, etc. But with tracing itself, if you could send an email around with the actual costs involved, I think it might be appreciated. We might consider a course of action in the next meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I'd say is if you're trying to keep on top of all members of the scheme as to their exact location, you could have a member who's 25 years old with a deferred benefit, whose benefit won't come into payment till age 60, that you wouldn't want to keep perpetually tracing if they don't tell you where they move. So there's lots of things to consider. So,
well,
but yeah,
I find anybody that thinks they're owed money is quite quick in letting people know where they are.
Yes.
I don't think we need to go chasing them if they're owed money. They'll be on the doorbell quite quickly.
No. The reason why we embarked, the pension regulator put us under quite a bit of pressure to enlist a tracing service, and it goes towards our data quality score as well. So there are other things to consider in how important it is to us and what we should spend on doing so.
Well, wasting money unnecessarily is not a good point, just to satisfy somebody's ticking the box as far as I'm concerned. Richard, you have a question?
Sorry, I didn't take it down.
Oh, I didn't see that. Thank you very much. Okay, no further questions on those two aspects. Mark, would you like to carry on, please?
Thank you. I'll just, if I may, Chairman, just finish on the financials on pages 42 and 43. Now we are going to, something which came out of the ISC was a request to circulate some more detail around the, if you like, the above the line in the cash flows in and out. So the, contributions, which etc., which form total income, and the benefit payments. So what we've already prepared, and I'm just peer reviewing it at the moment, is in the same form as the accounts and the notes to the accounts in those areas. So that should be ready to go any day. So I will circulate that. But the only update I will provide here, and it's actually quite a significant one, is just in the last 2 weeks we've had a significant inflow of contributions from the Department of Health relating to some legacy liabilities. And additionally, we've got a couple of local authorities who have decided to pay their deficit contributions in one go rather than spread over 3 years. And the outcome of that is actually the total income, rather than being 135,200, is actually around 150 million. So that, which is quite a significant change, but the majority of that was a single payment from the Department of Health. So that's the main change there. I think probably the variances you've seen these before of a similar magnitude. The only thing I would just remind members of is around management expenses. So obviously the income, the outflows, and beneath that you've got the management expenses. Now management expenses here are the ones we've had to historically pay out of, if you like, out of cash, in other words, invoiced. That's reduced considerably from what it used to be, because the majority of listed asset expenses are now come out of the asset pool itself. So within each sub-fund, the actual expenses come out of that. So the amount of expenses for investment we need to pay in terms of actually finding the cash to pay is significantly reduced from what it used to be, which obviously impacts the cash flow position as well. I will pause there and see if there's any questions around those financials.
Richard, I think you're off the mark again.
Yeah, thank you. Can we look at the Appendix 1 governance and compliance first?
Yep, by all means. Page 42, I think.
I won't guess what page numbers are, so I printed mine out. So I was going to raise it later on in the agenda when we're talking about governance and training in particular. But I do think that we need a key action to give us a training schedule of likely events that we should be participating in. The problem I've had over the last few months is we've been inundated by offers of training and events and conferences, and it's clearly people have got hold of our email addresses perhaps, and I was addressing all these things to us, but
can I say welcome to the club, Richard?
Well, exactly. Now you've probably got more than we have. You're the chair. But we do need some guidance from the officers as to what is appropriate and what is not. I don't want to end up on some course that's actually beneficial to administrators and not to a board member, which has happened. So I do think we ought to have an activity to put on the key actions to set us up with something to give us some guidance.
If I can explain the way I do it, is if I get what I consider might be interesting and obviously educational as regards pensions, I either contact Joe or Michelle and say, or obviously Paul, if it's financial side, is this worth me attending or listening into these days? And do I get points for it? That's the more important thing. And they obviously feed back and say, yes, that's good. And you will get 2 points or whatever the score is they're willing to give. But that's the way I work the system. Richard, I don't know whether the officers would like to contribute, whether I'm perhaps doing it the wrong way.
Well, I think the next agenda, so agenda item 6, Appendix 2, we have attempted to prepare a list of the ones we certainly would identify as being worth attending.
Okay.
It's been quite difficult because I think the normal schedule has been completely, as you imagine, been thrown out the window, and the virtual equivalents are different times of year, are badged differently, and so therefore we have been trying the best we can. But I think Appendix 2 in the next agenda item is an attempt at that. But if you feel that more is needed, then happy to.
Richard, can we come back to this then?
Yes.
At this next appendix, next agenda item.
Okay. Next item is a few pages on the key, which is investments section, the key actions on investments. I'm wondering whether we should have a review of our investment strategy in relation to global warming as an action in its own right. Especially in investment in oil, aviation, and shipping, international shipping. They're all problems for climate change. So what do you think about that?
I'll leave it with the officers to answer that. My reply, a personal reply, is we're always looking, or we are already looking at this in some great detail, but either Paul or Mark, if you'd like to feed in exactly what we're doing, it'll be quite useful for Richard, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously there will be a number of actions next year, and whether they are separate activities or whether they're encompassed within one with a number of, if you like, milestones or separate actions around this. So obviously you've looked at the investment beliefs. In the background, we are preparing a revised responsible investment statement. That will be coming to the February ISC. And then effectively from that will be developed a number of actions as to what does that mean in terms of what you actually want to do. I should say, sorry, obviously the responsible investment statement will go out to public consultation in the actual main investment strategy statement as soon as it's approved for launch by the Pensions Committee. So you've got the ISC are effectively doing the heavy lifting here. The ISC will produce a responsive investment statement that they're happy to go in the main investment strategy statement, and then the Pensions Committee will launch that for consultation. Once that's done, obviously what I'm saying is that there are a variety of actions that will arise from that in order for us to comply with that. And if there's a particular area that the committee wishes to be focused on, then that can go in there. So certainly things like the reporting around climate, that's needs to be done locally and is also being done concurrently at a pool level as well. So I'm chairing a task and finish group at the pool level, which is putting in place a pool level principles or guidance, as well as identifying what reporting needs to come for the pool to enable local funds to meet their responsibilities in this area. So we'll be developing it, and I think probably what that series of actions are will probably be picked up by the ISC first, and will then feed into the business plan.
I might be of help, Richard, if Paul undoubtedly correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, our actual amount of investment into what I would call energy projects has dropped from about 5% of the fund down to about 2.5%. Paul, is that correct figure there or thereabouts?
Yes, we did, and I think Councillor Robertson did acknowledge that. We did send a briefing note to say that we have a very, very small exposure to energy stocks such as oil. I mean, obviously, this is a very big fund. It's over 3 billion, and to have a small few million in this means that we are extremely focused on this issue. It's unlikely we'll ever get to zero, an absolute zero, because there are always fund managers who will see that there is a need somewhere in the world, and part of the recognition is that whilst the developed world is very much looking at reducing its emissions, other parts of the world don't have that luxury, and they still need those sources of fuel. So there is almost a just transition is a phrase that's used, is that some areas will radically reduce their exposure, but allow those countries that are less well developed that still need heating, lighting, and other energy sources to be able to use that. So, you know, I never see for a substantial period of time that we'll ever get to zero, because there is a need in the world, and we do invest globally. We don't just invest in the developed parts of the world.
I would just point out, I didn't just limit it to oil. I mentioned aviation and shipping, which are also major contributors to the problem. Yeah. So it's not just oil investment; it's the wider issue.
I think the way we're articulating climate risk in the beliefs is around the fact that it can obviously have a material financial impact on our investments.
Yes.
And so therefore I guess the next thing is, well, okay, do you want to, for example, look at reducing reserves, reducing carbon footprint, those kind of things to actually take some of that risk away from the portfolio. So that's what we're developing in the investment strategy the responsible investment statement at the moment.
It's definitely the impact on the investment that we have to recognise.
Yes.
It's not just the fact that it's a problem in its own right.
Yeah, exactly.
We mustn't omit the effect of cows.
Methane, exactly.
or peat.
Yes.
And I think Mark made a very valid point, if I may, that we are working very closely with our 11 partner funds or 10 other partner funds in Access. And we are trying to bring this together as a collective, which I think has far greater power than an individual fund acting in isolation. There are a number of funds in Access very keen on this topic. It will take some time over the next year to get it efficiently operational. So we ask for some patience as we bring our colleagues together in negotiation on this matter. As you say, I'm sure you're aware of multi-partner negotiations currently ongoing, that sometimes it does take time and patience.
Yeah, so as long as when
trips to Brussels.
Yes, right. Go on the train.
Okay,
when we get to the opportunities in February to identify areas we want to be concentrated on, that would be appropriate, I think.
Yeah,
any more questions? Sorry, I'm going to move it along if I may.
Yeah, one more question on the page.
Any more questions, Richard, please?
Appendix 2, the financial statement. I noticed we've got a massive reduction in income of 30%, which is part of the problem, of course. We also haven't attempted to note what changes in the market value of investments would have an impact on us. Can we have some comments on those two, please?
We haven't done that to date. I mean, it's effectively there's been a not only a recovery, almost an increase. So I think the investment income reduction is we contacted our managers just to try to get their view on what that would be. So that was the methodology there, but we haven't actually seen any change really in the market. The dip happened and then it immediately recovered. So the fund has performed remarkably well and held up remarkably well during the pandemic. And even the managers that have struggled have recently done incredibly well, such as Dodge and Cox. They've had a remarkable turnaround over the last few weeks.
Thank you.
Okay. I've seen then, Anne, would you like to ask a question?
Well, it may well have already been answered now. My question was about the investment income, because it does seem rather a large decline, 30%. And I wanted to understand more the reasoning that the investment managers used to reach such a figure.
It would be companies not paying dividends. So if you remember, there's been lots of companies which have suspended dividends or greatly reduced them, and that would have been the rationale for that. I'm not saying it was, It was there was clearly a great deal of uncertainty always in anything below the total income less expenditure on that page, which is why I guess it's a case of can we improve that forecasting in some way, which is something we probably need to look at next year, because it's fair to say that we do put variances against everything else, which are far more tangible and easier to put our finger on, but those ones are more difficult. But there was clear rationale that made sense to us when we saw dividends not being suspended across the board.
I did wonder how much of it was affected by the COVID pandemic and Brexit, whether or not that affected the fact that companies aren't paying out the dividends.
Shall I come in?
Yes, thank you,
yeah,
Paul.
Well, the first thing is that due to COVID, the biggest question was liquidity, i.e. have companies got enough money to operate when to survive and pay their bills when they can't actually trade normally. So there are a lot of institutions that are actually quite cash rich that were stopped by regulation. Banks, for example, they can afford to pay dividends, but obviously there's a political, there's an economic, there's a number of other issues there, and of course they've withheld those dividends. So it's more to do with COVID and the future liquidity of a company surviving, reserving its cash so that it can actually survive through very difficult times. We're still a number of months away, even with the vaccine, of getting full back to normal, what you would call pre-COVID normality, and that's still a concern. So what you have to bear in mind is that the income reduction is a reflection, it's an indication. We don't really know, as Mark said, it's really complicated. So we ask for managers to give us their opinion on this. And it is I think it's also very true to say that when dividends do come back online, they will be reset. A lot of companies will take the opportunity to reset them perhaps at a lower level than they were previously, and then they tend to build up over time. So it's not just the fact they're stopping paying dividends. I think there will be a reduction in that area, but it's also rentals on property. It's also in the interest on fixed income. I mean, all of these are suffering across the piece, and it will take time to come together. But it's not really, it's a blip. You know, it looks bad on the piece of paper, but it is a blip. We're a long-term investor, and the silver lining is that there is an opportunity for your fund managers to buy companies that they would feel attractive but wouldn't buy stock in because the prices were too high. When those prices fell, they took an opportunity in some cases to realign their stock position. And then as the recovery comes back in, hopefully they're holding, I say hopefully because it's their decision, not ours. Hopefully they've made good decisions. We have confidence in them, and they will come back and become stronger. But it will take a number of years to do that. So this is long-term investing, not short-term accounting. So on that basis, you know, we just got to let it play through and let it pan out.
Are you happy there, Anne?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Mike?
Thank you, Terry. My view is that the outlook for pensions for the next for income for the next 12 months is dire. I think there will be a savage further reduction in dividends and so on. But on the other hand, you've got things like Tesco's who want to hand out vast amounts of money. So there are some going the other way. The point about retaining your money and not paying it out in dividends is that the underlying asset value therefore increases because you've got all this money sloshing around in your bank accounts. So that will come through in later valuations. Just one other very small point. Could we please be consistent about use of brackets and minus signs? If you look on that page, investment income is minus 1,200, whereas management expenses is brackets 5,000. We just need to be of one mind. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mark, I think that rounds up your particular agenda item. Any more comments on, or from yourself or Paul in this particular?
No, I'm finished, thank you.
Have we any further questions on agenda item for 5, then the business plan. Are you happy for me to recommend that we note this particular report? No objections. Thank you. Let's then turn to agenda item number 6, which is governance and compliance report, pages 45 to 60. Joe, it's not Joe. Yes, it is Joe, isn't it? Joe, I think you're leading on this one.
Thank you. Yes. As you'll see from the report, there's only 2 items within it, one enormous one and one very little. The main content of this report is about the exit payment cap that we discussed in quite some detail at the last meeting. I thought before I start waffling on, if there was anybody that wanted me to go over the basics of the exit cap and its restrictions. Okay.
Got a couple of hands, so.
Yeah, so
Mike,
really.
Sorry, Mike has got a question, have you?
Yeah, just very quick, 2.2, there's a list of things that are included in the cap. Can you tell us which ones are involved with the pension fund?
All of them. In the sense that they will all go towards the calculation of the exit cap, even though we don't calculate what an individual will get as a redundancy payment or a severance payment. It all goes towards the calculation of the exit cap. The only thing that we physically calculate ourselves is the pension strain cost, which is the cost of paying pensions early. But it will still, that's the starting point for the employers, and then they build in the other costs associated. But
that's fine.
It's not quite as easy to put it out on what's on its own there.
Well, I'll come in here if I may. Members, as you know, the last meeting we went into some detail over this, and Joe has already said that. Is there anybody that wants to go into all that detail again, or are you happy for Joe to just give latest events, so to speak? I'm getting indication latest events will suffice, Joe.
Okay, lovely. That makes it a little bit easier. So our last meeting was at the beginning of October. So then at that point we knew about what the exit cap regulations were going to be saying, but they weren't in force at that time. They've now been brought into force on the 4th of October, 4th of November. We did get a few days' notice that would be the effective date. But since then, on the 14th of October, we did have MHCLG release a consultation on how further reforms to exit payments within the LGPS, which then gave us a few more issues to think about. Where we are now is the exit payment regulations are now in force, but no changes have been made as yet to the LGPS regulations to be able to carry out the requirements of the exit cap regulations in the spirit that they are intended by the Treasury. So what we have found, what all funds have found themselves in a position is actually not knowing what to do for the best if a case actually presented itself. And as we speak, as it stands today, the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund has not presented us with a case of a member who's age 55 plus, whose exit payment package exceeds 95k. So we haven't actually had to deal with a case in practice yet, but we do need to have prepared ourselves for what would need to take place should that event arise before the LGPS regulations are amended. And we're not expecting the LGPS regulations to be amended until January. Probably January is probably an early date now. And that consultation is still also ongoing on how the regulations should read. That consultation on the draft LGPS regs wasn't particularly wonderful. Some of the wording wasn't great. That consultation closes on the 18th of December. What we're not clear of then is whether there will be a further consultation on those amended regulations because of all the feedback that would have been received, or whether they will just be pushed through. So what we find ourselves in the position of at the moment is a conflict between all of the sets of the regulations, which are currently not in line with each other. Sorry, I'm just taking my notes up on the screen. So what we have, I'm just looking away from the screen at the moment, is if a case did present itself to us and the retirement date was after the 4th of November, we're not unclear as to what we should do, which sets of, whether we should follow the restriction of the public sector exit payment regulations as they read, where a reduced benefits should be paid where the 95k cap is exceeded. The LGPS regulations as they stand today do not allow for that to happen. So if we were to follow that as a rule, we would be technically acting outside of the law. So what has happened is the Scheme Advisory Board have gone away and sought legal opinion on how we should manage this conflict and regulations. And I'll go into that into more detail. And the MHCLG Minister has issued a letter advising administering authorities on how to proceed. And those two views differ quite differently. So if I move on, sorry. So we had to go and seek our own legal advice. We couldn't just rely on the Scheme Advisory Board advice. So we have done that. And the advice coming from our legal advisors is along the lines of the Scheme Advisory Board, where we will only offer a deferred benefit or a fully actuarially reduced pension if a member is over the age of 55 whose exit package exceeds 95k. So that's what we plan to do should their case present itself before the LGPS regulations arise, are amended sometime next year. What we have got concerns around at the moment, just looking against my different notes, is we've had concerns about how we communicate this to scheme employers. Because employers, we have our point of view on how we should deal with these cases, and the employers may want to take a different route. So we have sought our own legal advice, and part of that legal advice was a note to the scheme employers on how we would prefer to operate under these conditions. That's been disseminated to all our scheme employers for them to consider. Like I say, as of yet, we've not had a real live case to actually test against. So that was issued last week. We're also in the process of amending our procedures to take into account the complications that we have now with providing retirement estimates in this interim period too, and we're working on that. Fortunately today we have the actuary on the call, which is good because we have used our scheme actuary, Hyman Robertson, to provide us with some pension strain cost factors before we can use the GAD factors that we are not able to use until the LGPS regulations are in place. These new factors have the effect of being roughly in line with the national GAD factors. So what that means in practice is the GAD factors are actually lower in impact. So the pension strain is coming out a little bit less than what it would do if we were using our previous sets of factors. And Douglas will jump in if I'm about to say anything wrong here. So that should have an impact on the amount of people that would be affected by the 95k cap, because it should reduce the value of their pension strain in line with what should be intended when the LGPS regulations go live. On a larger scale point of view, I mentioned at the last meeting, or I've mentioned in this report, there's a number of judicial reviews in scope at the moment regarding this matter. There is going to be what is called a permissions meeting in this month, where it will be considered whether one of the first complaints will be able to go through the judicial review process. And following that, that will determine how it involves Pensions Ombudsman gets with any complaints that come up in the meantime. So there'll be sort of a test case, if you like, to see how funds should operate. And also another point of fact is that because we're operating outside of the law due to the conflicting regulations, there have been some concerns whether we need to report ourselves to the pensions regulator. But we have had confirmation from the pensions regulator that they're not actually that interested, or they won't be looking at these cases because they know the conflict situation that we're in. So it won't be sort of an additional fund being penalised for not being able to do the right thing because of the absence of the necessary regulations. So we're safe on that front. Appreciate that's a lot of technical information. So does anybody have any questions at all?
I have a question. Let's take the worst case scenario and we're taken to court by one of our members. Are we in a position that whatever happens, our costs are covered?
Well, I suppose that could be about any issue, I guess. You're talking about insurance?
Well, in this particular one, well, either by insurance or a form of a bond or something else with regards to, here we have authorities telling us to do one thing, the law's telling us to do another thing, and we're the sandwich in the middle, so to speak.
I think what would probably happen at the moment, because we know these judicial reviews are going through, or at least the first case is, that would be put on hold, waiting the outcome of that. I don't think it would be entertained until the first test case has been run through.
if I may come in there, Chairman, but if there's an ombudsman available, then it has to go through that anyway. You can't. So when there's been, if you like, threats of legal action before, it's always been pointed out that it would have to go through firstly through an internal dispute resolution process, and then to the ombudsman, and thereafter to the if they're unhappy with the ombudsman's decision, and whether there's a right of appeal to the court. So that would be the process for individual disputes.
Right. Can I have a technical term either from Dawn or from anybody that can help me? My computer has just decided it wants to update itself. And now I've got a little blue square come up in the bottom right-hand corner saying your computer is about to restart. And it's given me a time of about an hour remaining before it does restart. Is there a button I can push to get rid of this, or am I held to ransom, so to speak?
You should be able to press on it, and it should give you the option of
restart or snooze.
So I click on snooze, and hope it may come up again, and just keep clicking snooze until we're out of the meeting. It should allow you to do that.
Right. If I disappear, you know I pushed the wrong button.
I had it restart the same thing at lunchtime, and it literally came straight back on. It wasn't one of these that took ages. So
I'm gonna hit snooze anyway. Right, I'm back to normal now. Hopefully I don't disappear now. I do apologise for interrupting the meeting, but it hasn't happened before. Fine. Mike, you have a blue hand up.
Yes, just very quickly, is it possible to give a best guesstimate as to whether the effect of this 95,000 limit is going to be positive for us in cash terms or negative? Answers on a postcard.
I don't know if Douglas has a view on that, do you?
I mean, all other things being equal, it must be positive, if anything, because it is potentially restricting the benefits which the fund is having to pay out. As Joe says, we need to wait for judicial review and so on, but even then, I mean, this is going to happen. It's the only debate is whether it kicked in from 4th November or it's not going to happen until 1st of April or whatever. But once it goes through, the whole point of it is to restrict the exit package payments made out.
The only thing it is doing is it does mean we'll be getting less money up front when people get made redundant. So the strain factors, as we said, produce lower strain figures, but the cost of the benefit is obviously still what it always has been.
Yeah.
Even if reduced, the strain factors for that reduced benefit would be produce a lower strain than what it does ordinarily at the moment. So I think there's some more money will have to be picked up through the valuation process, as I understand it.
Yeah, there's a timing thing. But.
Yeah.
Thank you then. Joe, I think we've got to cover the risk management, and I think Appendix 2 on page 59. I think it's the training appendix, isn't it?
Yes.
I'd like to cover that, please.
Yes. So this is the published version of the events that we know about at the time of publication of these papers. Following up to Councillor Robertson's question, Michelle and I, will always circulate to you directly courses, seminars, webinars of any relevance that we think are beneficial to you. I'm aware that your email will have been obtained by some of the marketing companies regarding events. They don't always contact us, myself or Michelle, with the same events. They'll contact you directly. So what I recommend is that should you get something that you're not sure, or anything that you get that you're thinking of attending, that you send it to Michelle and I, that we can check it out just to make sure it will be worthy of your time. Particularly investment ones, there will be lots of them coming around. Paul's more than aware of those, and he will give an opinion whether it's of value or not. But certainly anything that comes from us has been thought about and considered as relevant to you. So that's the best guide.
Mike?
Thank you, Chairman. In a situation where a member anticipates not being a member post-May, should we assume that our current level of ignorance is one that we should take with us into retirement? Or should we go on these courses?
Well, there's still maybe relevant decisions that you'll need to make as a committee member in the March meeting. So, yeah, I mean, if we're definitely not standing for re-election, then let us know, and then we will know not to send you information that's post that date. But
thank you,
Richard.
Thank you. Could we take the example of the annual PLSA conference? What sort of guidance should we have on what of those multiple events would be of use? I don't remember receiving anything.
are you referring to the one dated 12th to 16th of October?
Yes.
I'm sure we would have circulated that at the time. Again, these are quite good now, these virtual ones, because you don't have to attend the whole event. You can dip in and out of the relevant programs that you wish to.
Yeah, we knew about it, and they contacted us endlessly about reminding us that it was on, but we didn't get any guidance as to which elements of it would be interesting and useful to us. That's what I'm saying. It's just far too much of it to grasp what was best to look at. Is that something you could do in future?
Yep, as soon as we get a program in advance. We're still getting used to these virtual meetings where there's various conferences with multiple events going on at the same time. So yes, we'll build that into our what we do going forward. I'm sure virtual meetings are likely to stay in place even when life gets back to normal, because they're just a lot more convenient.
Okay.
Joe, is it worth adding that with some of these conferences, it can be on an individual basis rather than across the piece. So those of you that attend more events perhaps don't need to attend as many of these. What I would say, the ones that you get just sent to you that are not on the recommended list, then there's that's a judgment of whether that topic is of interest for you. And a lot of these, sometimes we don't get the full agenda until quite shortly before the event because they're not sure who's going to be presenting. So it's not necessarily quite straightforward. Sometimes it's a judgment of the individual member as to whether A, they have an interest, or B, they think it's a topic they haven't covered sufficiently themselves. It's not always easy for officers to make that judgment.
Okay. Well, as I said, I get quite a lot of circulars asking me to attend meetings. I think obviously with experience, Richard, as and when you attended a few, you'll probably be able to make your own decision what you want to listen into or not, as the case may be. But I'm quite sure the officers will keep you apprised of what they believe are best interest to you. I have Mike. I still got your hand up. Is that a new question?
Sorry, mistake.
Okay. Otherwise, are we happy then to note that this agenda item and make the obvious recommendation? Okay, thank you very much. So the next one is agenda item 7, risk monitoring. Joe, is this within your bailiwick?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so this
that's
report
on, sorry, that's on pages 61 to 78. 61 to 78.
Okay. So here we have the updated risk register. As you'll be aware from the report, we do work with the Cambridgeshire Local Pension Board, who've taken interest in the risk register and have recommended some further risks and controls to be added to the report as part of the regular monitoring. So section 2.1 of the report details the changes that have been put in place by the pension board at their last meeting on the 6th of November. You can see that risk number 13 has had an extra word added in, annual, with regards to cyber training. Risk number 19, which is actual experience, materially differs from actuarial assumptions used at each valuation. Additional control has been added in there, as you can read from the report. And also risk number 21 has been updated too. Following where we find ourselves now with the exit cap, being in a situation of regulations being in conflict, we've also added in ourselves an additional control on risk number 14, which is failure to administer the scheme in line with regulations and guidance, with the additional control being that we'll seek legal advice on matters where that happens again. The report also details in section 3 The short to medium term risks, which we've detailed as of course the pandemic is still a risk. We're still working from home. The vaccination program only started today, so we've still got a way to go with that. And then section 3.2 is administrative pressures facing the fund. And it goes without saying that the exit cap has been a considerable administration impact on us since it surfaced a few months ago. It's taken up an awful lot of our time and changed the way we work as well, quite considerably. We'll be working once it happens. So that's been detailed in this report too. So other than that, that's the content of the report, and happy to take any questions on that.
Any questions? I have a blank page in front of me there. Joe, I think you've got off lightly on that one.
Not quite.
Not quite. Oh, okay, but Richard, off you go.
Sorry, I just found my note on the last page. Oh no, it's the, I don't know what page number it is now. Page 68, possibly. The risk about long-term investors. The fund believes climate risk has the potential to significantly alter the value of the fund's investments. And it says managers are required to report regularly on their compliance. How do they do that, and to who?
Mark or Paul, do you?
Can you reference it again? I think I've
risk
got the
number
answer.
3.
It's on page 68. It's risk number 3, and it's the third, and the controls, it's the third dot down.
So they were asking us how. The question is, how do managers report regularly on their compliance with our ESG policy?
Apologies, as they say. My first answer was brilliant. Shame it was on mute. So the point here is it's done in a number of formats. So there's always an annual report that's done from a compliance point of view, but also when we meet managers and we interview them, and as you've done yourselves when they've attended the ISC, they will always have a section in their report on how they comply with responsible investment and ESG factors and how they've affected their decision making, etc. And also, if we have a concern, we will specifically go to them and ask them questions. But there are a number of formats in which they do it, and it's basically embedded into their core processes.
So, I mean, you've said if you go to them, they'll give you a report, but it says here they should be reporting regularly.
Sorry, they do. So when first of all, they have a monthly report. We don't. We get inundated with monthly reports from every one of them. They'll always have an ESG RI section. When they present at committee, they'll actually bring that up to speed for that particular meeting, and they'll present on that. I mean, sometimes it's a light touch, and sometimes those interviewing the manager will actually concentrate on areas of ESG that they want them to respond on. Typically, we always ensure that ESG and RI factors are embedded into decision making. What you will find is investment managers, they do tend to have responsible investment teams now, because it's not an us and them. I mean, a lot, there's a view sometimes it's us and them. It's not. They are paid very well to make good decisions on our behalf. They don't deliberately make bad decisions. They are making decisions using all of the information. They have analysts that look at all the factors, including responsible investment, because they want to know that if they buy a stock over a 3 to 5 year period of time, it's going to levy the returns that they want from it. And the more returns they get from that stock, the more they're rewarded. So there's an alignment. When we choose an investment manager, remember that ESG is a factor in our consideration. And we do absolutely look at managers and we challenge them on their ESG RI beliefs, their policies, their exposures. It is a common feature of how we engage with them. But they provide it naturally anyway, but we also interact with them significantly on these topics.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Richard, thank you very much. Mark, before I call you in, Lee, any question on that update?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just a question. I do apologise if I've missed it anywhere in the risk register, but it was around Brexit and whether any consideration's been given to the risk that might arise from that. Particularly given we're now very, very close to finding out whether we have a deal or not.
Shall I come in on that one, Mr. Chairman? Because I acknowledge I didn't give the full response to the previous question on that. Brexit is very UK centric and Europe centric. What this fund did about a year ago is we disinvested from direct active UK mandates and became global. We are a global investor. So we have mitigated a lot of the Brexit risk by only having, shall we say, the normal weighting you would have to the UK from an active manager. And an active manager can choose to hold stock in the UK or elsewhere. So if you're looking, we want the best bank, and they're investing in banks, they may not buy a UK bank. They will buy the best bank they can. And they'll take things like Brexit into consideration, as well as responsible investment, etc., Lee. The other factor is that markets, you always hear that markets have already priced in Brexit, but you know very well that there's a lot of sentiment. So at the moment, the FTSE, for example, bounces up and down every time there's a bit of news on either Brexit or a vaccine or a political issue that's coming up. So that whilst markets do factor it in, there is still a sentiment around the issue. But it also affects Europe as well. What I would say is that we are long-term investors, and Brexit is, whilst it may have seemed to have gone on for a lifetime, it is only a relatively short blip in the fact that we're holding members' assets for many decades, not just for a number of years. So I would say it could have a short-term impact. We've reduced that by reducing our exposure to the UK directly. We have checked with our managers on their policies and how it impacts, and most of them really don't blink very much in terms of Brexit. And the other thing to remember is the FTSE 100, which is a UK index, is extremely global in its nature. A lot of those companies are very large companies, and they trade globally in their own right anyway. One of the factors that the FTSE has, of course, it is quite high in financials and energy. And that isn't a Brexit issue. That could be a climate change issue, or it could be an issue around fiduciary duty, the fiscal policy of governments, and the fact that banks are having to deal with a COVID exposure and perhaps an extended period where they are dealing with lower interest rates and risks around liquidity, bad debt, etc. So it's a complex area, but Brexit has been considered. The ISE made a decision to move away from or reduce that exposure to mitigate the risk.
Happily?
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you then. Mark, I see you had your hand up. It's gone now. Are you happy?
If the committee are happy with those explanations, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. That's fine. Good. Well, I think that completes that particular section.
Sorry to interrupt, Chair, but I have to leave for another meeting.
Okay, Anne. Yep, it's fine too. You said you were going to go anyway. Thank you very much for coming. Much appreciated. Can't hear you. Okay. Okay then. Thank you. Asked to review current risks facing the fund. Well, we reviewed the current risk. It's also been done by the board. Are you happy to accept that recommendation, members? No objections. Thank you very much indeed. Shall we then turn to agenda item number 8, which is the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund Data Improvement Policy, and I think that's back with you, Jo.
Thank you.
And that's pages 79 to 92.
Thank you. Yes, so 2 years ago we introduced a data improvement policy, and now it's time to give it a review. So the detail of this report covers that. The changes that we've made to the policy are detailed in section 2.1 of this report on page 80. Effectively, what we've done is on data audit, we've removed the independent review of processes used when receiving data from scheme employers. Because this activity is actually conducted by internal audit now. The second point we've changed is we've updated the scope of the LGPS National Insurance database, because that has increased in what you can use it for over the last few months or so. And member tracing mortality screening section we've updated following our successful procurement of a supplier of those services, and we've removed any reference to Western Union with regards to the proof of existence exercises. A data improvement plan will be produced as a result of the data scoring activities that we have undertaken in the last couple of months. Whilst they're not in the report, I can give you an update on our scores. So the common data score has gone up by 4% to 85% now, and the scheme specific score has gone up from 72% to 73%, and that's what we'll be reporting to the pensions regulator in their mandatory annual return, which is due on the 15th of December in a week's time. So really, I'm asking the committee if you will approve the amendments to the report and acknowledge that our plan for data improvement will follow shortly.
Well, that's the proposed changes to the report. I see, Richard, you have your hand up.
Sorry, where were those figures you were just referring to? Where are they in the report?
I said they weren't in the report. They've only recently been produced. Did you want me to repeat them?
Well, is there a place in the report where they're talked about?
No, but I thought it was relevant to the topic of conversation. So that's the reason why we have a data improvement policy and plan, is because we need to report our data quality scores to the pensions regulator.
Okay, just repeat them then, thank you.
A common data score, which is basic details of a member, name, address, date of birth, national insurance, presence of a national insurance number, that kind of information. That is now 85%, up 4% on last year. And the scheme specific score is 73%, up 1% from last year. I would caveat that, as I often do when I talk about data scoring, that this is just our way of scoring our data. There is no mandation as to how to do it across the LGPS funds. So depending on what system you're using or what methods you're using or what you deem to be correct data, you'll come out with a different score across the 89 funds that are in the LGPS. So when you're thinking about those scores, you need to bear that in mind, that there is no one uniform way of all funds reporting it.
No, but you're improving on it anyway, so thanks.
Dawn, you happy with those?
Yeah.
Dawn, did you get that?
Yes, I did. Yes, Chairman.
Thanks very much. I saw your hand up briefly. I just thought I wanted to talk. Okay, with those figures acknowledged, anybody else like to raise any points, please? If not, recommendation, the Pension Fund Committee reviews and approves the revisions to the data improvement policy. All agreed? No objections. Thank you very much. Right, I think Corey is coming in next. Then agenda item 9, employer admissions and cessation report, page 93 to 100. Corey, I think you're leading on this one.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Before I start going through the report, I would just like to make a comment that normally this report is quite light touch. It's normally just for the committee to note the contents of it, but there is, in this particular version of the report, an important decision for the committee to make that I suspect will warrant some discussion. That's recommendation 3 in the recommendations regarding the contribution requirements for Peterborough City Council. So I won't dwell on the admissions and the cessations because they're quite standard. If I skip straight to that part of the report, this is linked.
Sorry, Corey, is this public domain?
Yes, it is. Yes, this is public domain. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's just checking.
So if we skip to, I haven't got page numbers on here, unfortunately. It's in the cessation section of the report, and it is the paragraph 3.4, vivacity, culture and leisure. This is an employer.
99.
Sorry, Chairman.
Page 99, I think.
97, Chairman.
97, is it? Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Vivacity, culture and leisure was a provider providing the leisure and cultural facilities in Peterborough, so running the leisure centres and the museums on behalf of Peterborough City Council. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic and the pressures from COVID, they have had to hand that service back to the council and cease participation in the fund. You'll see in the detail of the report on paragraph 3.4.3, had we pursued a deficit payment from Vivacity on their exit, there would have been a £4.1 million payment required from them to cover that deficit. The reason for that is that they are termed what's called a community admission body. And at the point that they entered the scheme, there was no requirements for them to provide a guarantor for their liabilities. So if they cease in the fund and don't pay their liabilities, normally they would be spread across all other employers in the fund. So we take quite a conservative approach in valuing those liabilities on exit to make sure that we collect a prudent amount of money from them, so we don't have to spread those liabilities across all employers in the fund. Rather than pursue that route, which would have led to us not receiving the full 4.1 million because Vivacity is going into insolvency and wouldn't have the funds to pay all of that, I negotiated with Peterborough City Council for them to take on responsibility for those liabilities. So the remaining assets and liabilities that are attributed to Vivacity would pass to Peterborough City Council. And that would happen on our less prudent ongoing basis, because we now have an employer standing behind those liabilities that if the amount that is sitting in the assets isn't enough in the future, we can go back to Peterborough City Council as part of their normal contribution requirements to put more money into that, because it will be pooled with the rest of their liabilities. On that basis, rather than there being a £4.1 million deficit, there would actually be a £3 million surplus. And that's because of the different discount rates that we're applying when assessing what today's money is worth when we need it in 20, 30, 40 years' time. I'll pause there for any questions on that particular point before moving on to the recommendation that's in here.
Any questions? No questions, Corey?
Okay, so part of the conversation with Peterborough City Council about getting them to take on the liabilities was they made a request that, given the impact that this would have on their funding position, materially improving their funding position for where it is now and reducing their own deficit, to help them cope with the pressures from COVID on their budget, they asked that we consider a reduction in their contribution rate for the remaining period of the valuation. The recommendation that we're putting in front of the committee is that you approve a reduction of the contribution, the secondary contribution they need to make, which is the payments directly to their deficit, by half the value of the credit they're receiving from taking on the Vivacity assets and liabilities. We're recommending half because Peterborough City Council is a long-term employer. The assets that they have could go up or down throughout that time, and there could be some volatility. So we wouldn't recommend reducing their contributions by the full credit they're going to receive. Instead, we've recommended that we reduce that by half. Now, the important thing to say is that the actuarial colleagues that are here on the call with us have had a look at this for us and have given us their opinion on doing so and have approved that from an actuarial point of view. So they are comfortable that by reducing Peterborough's contributions by this amount, we can still achieve the funding objectives that we were looking to over the same period of time that we assessed them originally. I'm happy to take any questions on that point there, unless Mark has anything particular that he would like to add on this point.
Can I just come in? You said the remaining period of the valuation. What sort of timescale is that, please, Corey?
So we'd be revaluing 31st of March 2022 is the official valuation date. The contribution strategy in place at the moment is planned to continue to the 31st of March 2023. So we're looking to make that reduction within this cycle. It's not crossing a valuation cycle, and it would require an adjustment to the rates and adjustment certificate, which is why I'm mentioning it's being done over the remainder of the valuation cycle.
And obviously with Douglas listening in, and I know you've probably got a crystal ball there, what changes after this particular valuation period?
What changes? So the if they've planned a schedule of contributions of, I think it's something order of 1.9 million a year of secondary contributions, I think Peterborough City Council, for the remaining of period up to March 23. So they would reduce by 1.25, 1.5 million spread over that period. Thereafter, all other things being equal, their contribution requirement would go back up to the 1.9 million a year.
So
and
returns.
we were, sorry?
Returns.
Yes, and so that would be the new starting point. So if they were to have a contribution freeze, for instance, from 2023, the freezing would be by reference to the 1.9 million, the previous level, not the new temporarily reduced level, if that makes sense.
Mark, did you want to come in before I bring in Richard and Lee?
No, I think it's been explained well, so I'm happy to see if there's any further questions.
Thank you. Richard.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's really, it seems alarming that the difference in valuations can be 7 million. I mean, that is a huge difference. Is it because of the age profile of the people working for Vivacity or something like that? Is there a basic reason for it?
If I could bring my actuarial colleagues in there.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you. In essence, we're taking a very much more prudent basis. So we assume, ordinarily, we assume that the employer's asset share will grow in line with whatever you get a risk-free gilt yield type return plus something, okay? Because you're investing in things that you hope will do significantly better than gilt yields. And that's the basis for saying that there was a £4 million, that was a £3 million surplus. If instead the employer was to cease with no guarantor, then it means if it lands up having a deficit because of market falls in future, the other employers have to pitch in. We want to avoid that. Therefore, we say we want the departing employer to pay a funding cushion, and that is materially jacked up. That is more like based on just assuming they would only have returns in line with gilt yields, risk-free returns. And that's a fairly standard approach. That can make a very large, that can make sort of 30, 40, 50% difference in the assessment of liabilities. So it feels very significant. You're quite right, Councillor Robertson, but the answer is that once the employer has left, there is no recourse to them.
No.
And as long as they have members in the fund, and that's going to be for decades, then the other employers in the fund are potentially exposed to picking up the tab. That's why we build in such a material cushion. It is something that forms part of the funding strategy statement, which is consulted with employers at least once every 3 years.
Okay, well, I think on the, we'll have to accept what you're saying. That's the way it works. I think taking half of it against Peterborough's liabilities sounds reasonable to me. Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. Lee?
Thank you, Chair. Just reading at 3.42, they suggest that this is a temporary arrangement on Peterborough City Council's part. I mean, I'm presuming from that the staff will be trooping across to the City Council to deliver the services, but the intention then appears to be to relet a contract once the pandemic's ended. I'm just wondering what impact that had on it, and perhaps the answer to the first question might have answered that, but presumably at some point the situation for the City Council will change again.
Yes, my understanding of that at the moment is that they are taking the services in-house at least for a year, maybe 2 years, before seeking an outside provider in more stable times, shall we say, once we get through the pandemic, to provide those services. I can't really say much more about that. Obviously, it's a commercial interest with the city council, and I haven't got too involved in exactly what their timeline is, and I don't think it'd be appropriate, even if I did, to talk about that in a public setting like this. But in terms of the impact on the funding position, when they move those staff into the new provider, the liabilities for those staff, including the legacy liabilities, would move across to that new provider, as would a level of assets equal to 100% of the funding. So effectively, the surplus that Peterborough had received by taking on these assets and liabilities would be trapped within the city council. It would stay there, and the full funding would go to the new provider. So that excess would not follow to the new provider.
Happy, Lee?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thought that was likely to be the situation, but that's a helpful response.
Mike, thank you.
Chairman, apologies, I need to go to another meeting.
Fine, Mike, no problems.
I need to give you a call later today.
I'm in all the time.
Lovely, thank you.
Thanks, then. Okay, I'd like you to take your hand down, Lee. I'd be appreciated if you wouldn't mind. Thanks, lovely. That completes then employers and admissions and cessation reports. Anything untowards with regards to the admissions and cessations part, Corey?
No, other than the Vivacity case that we've just discussed, everything else is fairly standard in there, and it's just for noting, obviously approving the sealing of the admission documents as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the recommendation is to note the admissions, note the cessation, and approve the revision of the contribution payments required by Peterborough City Council as set out in paragraph 3.4.5. Are we all happy to endorse that? Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item number 10, administration strategy review. And Corey, I think that's back in your hands again.
Yes, thank you. And I'll just apologise in advance. The timing of my reports is quite untoward. It's the school run, and my dog does tend to bark at those people moving past. So apologies for the noise that might come in a few moments. Yes, the administration strategy has come up for review. This is the document that sets out exactly what is expected of both the administering authority and employers in participating in the fund, and sets out not only the responsibilities of both sides, but also the key performance indicators on which performance will be measured. Those key performance indicators are split into 3 areas. One that measures the overall member experience. So that's the performance of both the fund and the employers together. And then the other 2 sections independently look at the performance of the fund and the performance of the employer. So the appendices to the report, which is to the strategy, which is included with the report, sets out those in each separate section. In terms of the revision of the report, the last time that this strategy was amended, we were in the process of putting together joint strategies across both the Cambridgeshire and Northamptonshire Fund. We now take a different approach to that, obviously respecting the sovereignty of each fund. So I have separated the strategy into individual strategies for each fund. So the majority of the changes will be removing reference to Northamptonshire Pension Fund and any wording that talked in the plural about both funds. I've obviously made that specific where I can. We have also updated the pension fund objectives since the last time that this strategy was reviewed. So you will see a number of changes on the objectives just to make sure that the wording matches the current wording that we're using for those. And the bit that I wanted to draw your attention to the most is the amendments that I have made in the KPI section of the report and the section that details in what scenarios we would look to recover charges from employers. Again, I don't have page numbers here, but page 11 is the first page for me of the strategy itself that I'd like to draw your attention to. This is the section discussing the charges that we would levy if we need to recover some costs. Chairman, I don't know if you have a page number there at all for people.
I'll try and find one for you on my notes.
So it's the section titled Illustrative Additional Administration Costs, Chairman.
That's page 113.
Thank you. One of the main changes that I've made here is on the second page of that table, and it's the top section of that table, and you'll see the amendments monthly annual membership data. This is to reflect the fact that we now collect data monthly from employers, not just annually. So I've added that responsibility into the requirements and the charges that we would levy if those reports are received late. The value of the charges reflects the amount of manual work that is required if we receive those reports late. This is regarding items on Altair moving forward if we had to do manual work. So the records don't match up exactly with what we receive in the monthly report. We have to do lots of manual workarounds to get the membership data to match. Those costs reflect that work that goes on. The next changes I wanted to bring your attention to in particular were on page 17 of my report. This is page 2 of Appendix C.
Page 2121.
The changes here reflect that the annual benefit statements that we issue are now sent electronically to members. So I've added some wording in to reflect that that's how we now produce them and the deadlines with which we will post those onto the members' online pension accounts. They are the most significant changes to the KPIs here. The rest of them have just been tidying up of the wording or moving things around slightly to make them sit better with other KPIs. They don't actually substantially change the KPIs themselves. I haven't got any major changes to note other than those, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Corey. Richard, question?
Yes, you're obviously taking the opportunity to bring up to date quite a lot of this document. And I'm looking at the key objectives quite early on in the document, page 108 and 109, I think. I think that's probably where they are, where you've deleted most of the objectives and rewritten some new ones, some of which is copying in the older ones, but you've dropped the high quality, friendly and informative administration service. And I was just wondering, the cost effectiveness is no longer a concern. I was just wondering whether they should be completely dropped.
Sorry, may I come in here?
Of course,
that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah, the Pensions Committee agreed objectives a couple of years ago, and we did drop that one because we didn't think it was entirely appropriate in its entire context. So the ones that Corey has put in here under the key objectives are new to it, are our standard objectives. We can look at reviewing them, the whole scheme objectives, fund objectives in due course, but they are our set ones that we use for reports and policies like this.
So what are you saying? The ones that crossed out were already crossed out some years ago?
Yes, this is a review of a policy that predates the change in objectives.
Right.
If I could come in, I mean, so in the policies, what we're trying to do is to look at what of our fund objectives are relevant to this policy and incorporate them here. Obviously, the objectives are open to be, discussed, amended as you feel fit to see fit as a committee. I think the efficiency one is already in there, but in a different. So to administer the fund in a professional, efficient manner, utilising technological. So some of them are in different objectives now, but that's the rationale. We're looking at what of our fund objectives are relevant to this particular policy strategy.
Right. Well, what you're saying, we've already have changed these things anyway, is what you're saying.
Yes, so the problem that you had was the timing of the review of the different documents, and since this document was last reviewed, the main fund objectives had been updated in the meantime. So I'm just reflecting the latest version of that document.
Okay.
Thank you. Any further questions?
No, sorry.
Okay, thank you. I see no other hands raised. I'd like to take the recommendation then. Approve the amendments to the administration strategy. Are we all agreed? See no objections. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Right. Well, we now come to that time of day where the next two agenda items are not, unfortunately, for public viewing. Therefore, as these final two items on the agenda are exempt from publication, so the committee will need to decide whether to exclude the public and press from consideration of this report on the grounds that the report contains exempt information under paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. Members, then, may I ask, is there a general consensus in support of this recommendation that the committee can take now in order to go into private session? If anybody wants to disagree with this, would they please raise their hand? That being said, that's been carried unanimously. Monica, I hope you're still with us, but could I ask now